Good morning, everyone. I have to be real honest with you this morning. When I went to write this parable sermon number 2, I was going to do the story of the Good Samaritan. I was going to take the easy way out and do one of the many easy sermons you can do on that text. But I felt like that would have been disingenuous to what I laid out last week. That instead, the parable should be hard work. And if it isn't hard work, then you are doing something wrong. So today, we're going to do the exact opposite of an easy parable. And we're going to do the hardest parable that I could find. Our parable today comes from Luke 18, verses 1 through 8. And also, just as a reminder, if you didn't join us last week, some of the ideas come from the book Short Stories by Jesus by Amy Jill Levine. So make sure you buy that. We're going to talk about verse 1 in this parable for a second. Then we're going to talk about the ending. Then we're going to read the middle a few times. I know it sounds confusing, but just go with me. Luke 18, verse 1 says, "Then Jesus told his disciples a parable to show them that they should always pray and never give up." Last week in the parable of the prodigal son, we talked about what we bring to the text and how the titles already start to cloud our vision. Today in verse 1, we get something worse than a title. We get the author Luke telling us what the parable is before we ever get the chance to hear it. Luke tries to take the work out of the parable Jesus told and wants us to just nod our head and go along. But what Luke ends up doing is shaping how we read the story and inadvertently removing any real wrestling we should do with what Jesus says. So because of that, we are going to remove the error by Luke and pretend like that verse doesn't exist. Now we're going to jump forward to the end of the parable. Verses 6 through 8. They say, "And the Lord said, 'Listen to what the unjust judge says. And will not God bring about justice for his chosen ones who cry out to him day and night? Will he keep putting them off? I tell you, he will see that they get justice, and quickly. However, when the Son of Man comes, what will he find faith on the earth?'" Although these two verses give us a palatable interpretation and many starting points for a sermon, there is a lot of debate on if Jesus actually said this, or if this again was just Luke adding an ending that he thought helped explain a confusing story. Most people believe that this part of the story was added later. But if you remove this section of the parable and you remove verse 1, we get a structure that much more properly fits the parables that Jesus told. And there is no debate that verses 2 through 5 are from Jesus. So verses 2 through 5 is what we are going to take a look at. With all of that probably unneeded backstory out of the way, our parable today says, "In a certain town there was a judge who neither feared God nor cared what people thought. And there was a widow in that town who kept coming to him with the plea, 'Grant me justice against my adversary.' For some time he refused, but finally he said to himself, 'Even though I don't fear God or care what people think, yet because this widow keeps bothering me, I will see that she gets justice, so that she won't eventually come and attack me.'" I can't help but smile when I read this. What a weird story that Jesus decides to tell. When we read stories or we watch movies, we love a good versus bad matchup. We love pulling for the good character and watching as the ultimate good triumphs over the evil. If you don't believe me, Marvel's bank account begs to differ. On the surface, that is what we have here. A widow versus a judge. A judge that pretty openly does not fear God and does not respect people. The widow persistently antagonizing the judge until she gets what she wants. Seems like a basic good character versus bad character, with the good character ultimately winning. But like we said, if a parable feels too easy, then we are probably doing something wrong. When we first read the story, we have to acknowledge that we hold certain stereotypes. Stereotypes of poor, unfortunate widows and stereotypes of unjust judges. We read the story already assuming that the widow is seeking justice for a way that she was wronged. And once we make that decision in our head to stereotype her as good and the judge as bad, we have removed the challenge that Jesus presents to us in this story. Our English translation has also done us no favors in the matter. There are 3 words that could be translated a number of different ways, but because it is a widow that clearly is the good character, they got translated into the mildest of translations. Just to walk through them quickly, the word the widow uses as justice really means vengeance. When the judge says that she will get justice, it really means she will be avenged. And when the judge says he is worried about being attacked, it can also be translated as him being worried that he will be given a black eye. So the story should read like this. In a certain town, there was a judge who feared neither God nor cared what people thought. And there was a widow in that town who kept coming to him with the plea, "Grant me vengeance against my adversary." For some time he refused, but finally he said to himself, "Even though I don't fear God or care what people think, yet because this widow keeps bothering me, I will see that she gets vengeance, so that she won't eventually come and give me a black eye." So the story we have is a story about a corrupt judge and a violent, vengeful widow. A story where what we thought we knew about a person turned out not to be true. A story where there is no justice. A story where our stereotypes of people are called into question. The parable is a story that disturbs the order of the way things should be. It tells us not to assume that we can properly store away the character of the widow and put her into a box of poor and helpless. But instead, we have to acknowledge that, like anyone, a widow can be vengeful and violent. It tells us not to assume that judges are just and right, but can be corrupted and be lazy. If this parable does nothing else, it shatters our need to stereotype and make us do the hard work of viewing someone as an individual rather than a social role that we assign to them. It shatters the need for us to push people into roles of good and bad, of right and wrong, and instead forces us to all be part of the same human community. It forces us to ask questions that we hesitate to ask because the answer we come up with just might not fit what we want to be true. I've probably told this story before, but in social settings, whatever those are nowadays, I try to avoid telling people that I am a minister because of the stereotypes that go with that. When I was working for U of L, my boss asked what I was planning to do after graduation. And after telling her my path to ministry, she started profusely apologizing to me for all the times that she had cussed. When people know you are a minister, they tend to not be their authentic self and instead try to put up a front of righteousness and politeness as if we are somehow different, as if I too don't struggle with pride, selfishness, and anxiety. We allow the stereotype to separate us instead of us just being normal people all trying to do our best. This is not just something we do to individuals. We also stereotype groups of people. And when we make a decision to categorize someone or a group of people as something other than what they are, which is just a normal person full of gifts and flaws, then we are losing the challenge that this parable gives us. We have to stop viewing people as the other. We have to stop putting someone in a box before we ever talk to them. Our refusal to wrestle with this parable is why we continue to see so many minority communities crying out for equal justice. It's why we see a stark difference in the way different skin-toned protesters are treated. because we allow our vision to be clouded by the stereotype that we and the collective we have already assigned to them in our head. In order to really sit in the tension that this parable gives us, we have to be willing to shake off the predetermined roles of people and instead begin to view people simply as beloved children of God. Only then can we begin to move forward. Only then can we lean into the world that Jesus offered. And only then can we be who Jesus has called us to be. When we begin to really wrestle with the parables, when we stop accepting easy answers, then the parable can teach us how to ask the right questions. Jesus told stories instead of giving answers because he wants to remind us of the things we already know, but sometimes refuse to acknowledge. Simple lessons like not overlooking people in front of you, inviting everyone to the party, and not letting something as trivial as a stereotype dictate the way you treat someone. When you begin to see these stories laid out, you are forced to ask yourself how you deal with these lessons. And when you start asking those questions, then maybe we can start addressing the things that we do, most of the time without even knowing it, that prevent us from fully living into the kingdom of God. When Jesus started to tell a story, people leaned in and started paying attention because they knew something special was about to happen. My hope after these past 2 weeks is that whenever we stumble upon a story that Jesus is telling, a story he told long ago, or a story we can see unfolding with our own 2 eyes today, that we start to do the same, that we start to lean in because something special might just happen.